So in the last video we went over some of the game breaking issues and game enhancements that the community would like to see. If you didn't watch the last video, basically one of our Discord admins created a Google document that was then passed through a few different sim community discords. So a lot of people have actually had input on it and we just read through it all. So that's what we're going to do today, except we're going to go through the wish list section. So these aren't necessarily changes that we need to see in order to save the game mode, but more like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a wish list, things that we want to see, but we're not necessarily holding our breath, if you know what I mean. But before we get into it, one of the things I forgot to mention last video was actually that some of the RWRs that are displayed within the cockpit on some of the top tier jets are actually really hard to read. So I'm talking about the F5E, the Mirage 2000 and the F16. The problem with the F5E specifically is it just needs, it's too dark, so that needs to be brightened up. You really need to like sort of zoom in on it or really focus your eyes on it for a couple seconds to even read what's going on there. And the problem with the Mirage 2000 and the F16 is the fact that they're just like half the size. The actual like RWR display is like half the size of the screen that it's being displayed on, which makes like no sense. So that should be a pretty simple fix. They just need to upsize it a little bit. But without further ado, we're going to get into this wish list here. I'm not going to read all of the points because there is actually quite a lot here. But the first point here is basically a fuel slider. So I get this is people have been asking for this in RB as well, but in RB the most fuel you'd ever really take in props is going to be like 20 minutes or so. However, in sim you generally take the half an hour, 45 minutes, or the 60 minutes if you're playing props, depending on the type of match, and that's quite a bit. Like 15-minute fuel difference makes quite a big difference in terms of weight and everything. So it would be nice if we just saw like kind of like a slider, kind of like how they have for the ammo racks in tanks and stuff like that. It'd just be really nice. I'm not sure why this isn't added into the game yet, to be honest. So next up here, someone suggested pilot injury. So if your pilot gets injured, essentially, they're not dead yet, but they've been shot a few times, reduce the G resistance and add some tunnel visioning. So basically just adding like visual effects. At the moment, the way it is, if your pilot gets injured, it's actually quite hard to tell that they've been injured, apart from when you go to pull back on the stick and they just don't react as much. It would be nice if we had some sort of like visual effect. Like I think in IL2 does this, and I think the way they do it is like the screen starts going grey or something like that, right? Or there's like some sort of like tunnel visioning or whatever. So it'd be quite nice if we had like an effect like that, just because it would be a little bit more immersive and whatever. So the next point someone made here was to add compressor stalls for some of the top tier jets. So what a compressor stall is basically, if your certain aircraft, generally older aircraft, if your airspeed was too low and you started pulling like a whole bunch of AOA, it would actually disrupt the airflow that gets sucked into the engine. So the engine essentially wasn't getting enough air and you'd get like a flame out potentially. And at that point you'd have to restart the engine. If you've ever watched a Grounding Side one, a video of him trying to dogfight the vegan, you'll see that you'll hear like a lot of banging and stuff as he gets slow, and that's essentially the starter motor trying to relight the engine because it's turned off. I think this would get quite annoying in War Thunder. To be honest with you, it would definitely nerf a lot of planes, specifically the Vegan and even the F-14A. Maybe if they actually wrote down here as well, maybe add like a toned down version of it. So for instance, instead of the engine just completely cutting off, just have it give like a reduced power output or something, right, while you're pulling AOA or something until it restarts. Then someone suggested ECM pods. I know this is something that the RB community has also been asking for, and it's probably coming at some point, to be honest, but I feel like it would probably play a bit more of a role in sim just because you don't have any name tags or anything like that. So you actually rely a lot more on your radar to identify stuff. And I think this would be a good change. If they just added these things, it would definitely help out some of the strike aircraft that aren't as capable in air-to-air. So for instance, I've been flying the Tornado a lot recently, and honestly, try bombing anything in a full lobby on Denmark against the F-16s. You are going to get found immediately, and there's just nothing you can do. So this would definitely help out those types of aircraft, and it would just make combat a little bit more dynamic, I find. So another thing I've seen being suggested quite frequently over the last couple of years is giving us the ability to taxi, and to be honest, I don't even think this would be that hard to implement. You'd literally just have to change the spawn point from the foot of the runway to the hangars, which are like right next to the runway. So if you're looking at the jet airfields, right, the big ones, when you spawn in, if you turn to the right 90 degrees, you'll see like 100 meters away there's these two really big armored hangars. If you just switch the spawn point over there to in front of those hangars, then also have it facing away from the hangars, people that then want to taxi to the runway, which is only a short taxiway by the way, can then do that. And people that just want to get back into the action as quick as possible and maybe aren't too keen on the taxi idea can then just take off over the taxiway, or if they really want to, just over the grass. War Thunder's physics model doesn't really model rough terrain like that, so it's not an issue. And to be honest with you, I think a lot more people, especially in the sim community, would rather see this than people that wouldn't. So someone's put down mid-air refueling here. Look, it would be cool just to have it, right? But I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see this. Nor do I think would it even be that useful. I mean, when you really think about it, it would leave you so incredibly vulnerable, especially with the radars that we have at top tier now. I just don't really see the point. I don't think there would be much point in putting in that amount of effort into modeling a refueling aircraft, coming up with like a mechanic on how it would work and whatever, just for it to be like a little gimmick essentially. Also add some like actual raindrops onto the canopy. I know we already have them in the game technically, but like they're so skinny and tiny you can hardly see them whenever you do fly through a rain cloud, which do exist in sim by the way, but they're very rare. If you look at a game like Ace Combat 7, where every time you fly through a rain cloud, you have these like huge rain droplets going all over the canopy, and it just looks so much better. It does so much for the immersion and everything, and it looks really pretty. So just add them into sim, it would actually be greatly appreciated. So the next point here, and I've seen being made quite a lot of times on multiple different forums, is to increase the player count up to 64 players, because we can do it in custom battles. So here's where I stand on this. I think it's a good idea for props. I think if you have, say, like a Tunisia match with 64 players in, I don't know, 4.0 or something like that, it would actually be a lot of fun. It would also just increase the pace of the match on maps like Denmark, the larger maps like Denmark, Spain, for instance, because they are incredibly slow if you ever play them in props, even with the airfields being pushed all the way forwards. However, I think increasing the player count to 64 at top tier or anything above 11.0 would just not work that well, to be honest. I mean, just imagine 64 players on Tunisia with F-16s and MiG-29s. Just nah, it wouldn't be fun. So if you're gonna do this, maybe only have it for props, and maybe some of the early jets as well, so up to like 9.0 or something like that. But anything with a decent radar, no way. I think at the moment, what do we have at the moment? What's the cap at the moment? I think 32 players, 16 players aside. At the moment, I actually think that's too much for the smaller maps. So yeah, it'd be a cool idea, but only for props. And speaking of map sizes, I think it's time to add bigger maps as well. I mean, I know we've had a few big maps added recently as well, and they've just been added into RB as well. The problem is that I find on, say, like a map like Denmark, there is no way you can fly a strike aircraft at top tier without getting found. So I've recently been playing around in the German Tornado, the actual detectory one, which if you ever play sim, you'll know that Germany basically always goes up against the US, so you're always fighting F-16s when you're flying this thing. And whenever I play a map like Denmark or even Rocky Canyon or something like that, it is incredibly hard to bomb if the enemy team is full of players, because you just get found immediately. I mean, take Denmark, for instance. There's no terrain on that entire map that you can hide behind or anything like that. It's just completely flat. You can go to the edge of the map, but all it takes is for one F-16 pilot to just point their nose over there for like 2 seconds, and they're going to see you on radar. And then once they see you on radar, they're just going to home in on you, and then that's that. You can't really defend yourself, which, okay, I get it. A Tornado should not beat an F-16 in a dogfight. That's not what I'm arguing here. But the point is, there's no way you can actively play these strike aircraft or these bombers or whatever you want to call it at top tier, because you just don't stand a chance. The best map I've found for this is actually Vietnam, just because Vietnam has, I think, probably like the best terrain to altitude ratio that you have on a lot of the maps. So there's a lot, basically what I'm saying is there's a lot of hills you can hide behind. If you fly really low, even on a full lobby, you can make it through. It's quite difficult, but that's part of the challenge, right? However, on stuff like Denmark or Rocky Canyon, which is also quite flat, by the way, if you're just not flying in the middle where the canyon, the actual canyon is, you just feel so powerless sometimes, right? And so I think if we increase the map size, that would be a good way to deal with this. It would give these strike aircraft, it would actually make them playable, at least at these higher BRs, and also just, I don't think the current, 128 by 128 kilometers that we have in the game right now are going to fare that well against stuff once we get AMRAAMs and whatever, right? Like F-15s and stuff. I know AMRAAMs might be a little far away, but think about it. You're never at top tier. If you play a game like DCS, for instance, I know people don't like it when you compare War Thunder to DCS, but like just take DCS for instance. DCS has a huge map, so you actually end up flying up at the higher altitudes, like 40,000 feet or whatever like that, which is what these aircraft are actually designed to sort of cruise at. Now, in War Thunder, if you've, I mean, let me know if you've ever found anyone up at 40,000 feet, or let alone got a kill at 40,000 feet, right? Because there's no point. The map is just way too small. You're never realistically gonna get up there, and if you do end up climbing up there, no one else is up there, so it just ends up being a little bit boring. All in all, I think increasing the map size, at least at top tier, to at least double of what it is right now, I think would just make the gameplay a lot more realistic for jets, and would also just get rid of a lot of the clutter that you have nowadays. I mean, even 60 versus 16 is a little cluttered on something like Denmark or Afghanistan sometimes. So yeah, that's a change that I personally would really like to see. So the last point that I'm going to pick out on here is arguably the most ambitious one, and that is combined arms. When you think about it, this is the game mode that all gamers really want across all games, basically. And what I mean by this is, of course, add playable tanks and playable ships to Enduring Confrontation, and helicopters. All of the vehicles we have in-game, all playable within one game mode. Like I said, this is probably very ambitious, and I'd be surprised if we ever see this in War Thunder, but it is an idea. And we already have stuff like Naval EC, which I don't know why they didn't just add playable ships to Enduring Confrontation. Maybe because it's the simulation game mode, and I don't think Naval actually gets any simulator controls. As far as I know, I could be wrong on that. But so the way it would work is ships could capture strategic points along the shoreline, strategic ports or whatever like that, and then you could use that as respawn points. There could be cap zones out in the ocean, and could also potentially provide artillery support for ground battles that aren't too far away from the shoreline. I think that would be amazing. It would also give players a reason to actually grind ships, right? The reason I started grinding tanks is because I started playing ground sim, and I got so sick of never being able to actually spawn on the ground and sort of see that side of the fight, right? So I think this would encourage players to explore the naval tech trees a little bit more, and it would just make the game mode feel so much more dynamic. So some of the suggestions that have been given for the way playable ground vehicles should work is obviously not have them spawn at the airfields and have them drive over to the push points, because that would take hours, but have them spawn like a ways outside of the push points. And then also you would have to sort of redo the push points, because a lot of them, if you actually look at them, a lot of them are just like on really flat ground. And I know some of the maps like Tunisia springs to mind, Stalingrad, and I think Maginot Line as well. I could be missing a few other maps as well, have ground maps inside them, like inside the map. The problem is, if you actually look, you can see this on Tunisia quite well as well. If you actually look at the part which is in, I think, the D4 grid, it's like where the little town is on Tunisia, with the river running through it. That's actually a ground map, but if you actually look at it, like look really closely at it, it's not quite the same map. It's like a really low resolution version of the map. So you can see some of the bridges just aren't quite right. They don't quite line up with the ground on either side as well, and there's a bunch of rocks that in places that shouldn't be, as well as the ground being incredibly uneven and everything. So you definitely have to refine these areas of the big EC map, which would obviously take a lot of work, and you'd need to obviously add more of these as well into other maps, like for instance Denmark and Vietnam and Afghanistan, and all of these other maps that don't actually have ground maps sort of built into them. And the way the ground battles would actually work is you'd have to obviously make some changes to this, and I think that a good way to do it is just have some sort of front lines game mode, as just like in some other games, like I think Battlefield 5 had this. I'm not sure if the World War mode works like this. I've never actually played it. But the way it works essentially is there's like five flags, like some sort of uneven number of flags, cap points, and it starts off in the middle, and then whichever team captures that middle cap point, that then activates the next cap point in the direction of the enemy spawn, right? So they sort of push into the battle, and if the enemy team captures the cap point, it then activates the next cap point closer to your spawn, and then so you sort of slowly make your way over to the enemy spawn. That's sort of the aim of the game. I think this would also be like this would have a really nice mix of AI versus player combat. Obviously, depending on how many players actually choose to play as ground vehicles, this would be a really nice sort of balance, because believe it or not, people do like this like PvE and PvP mix, because if you just do PvE only, it's nice for like a couple minutes, but then it gets boring really quickly because there's generally no challenge, unless you play Elden Ring, but that's another topic. So having that mix of players in there as well, that you do have to keep your wits about you, because there are people looking for you to kill you. This would be incredibly fun, and it would also open up, for planes to come in, air support, and helicopters as such as well. The way I envision helicopters working, I touched on this a little bit in the last video as well, is I think they should be able to respawn at the mini bases that you can actually destroy. So these, you know, the little red circles that you can go bomb on every EC match. This would give the enemy team an incentive to actually go take out these bases as well, other than just, you know, the 500 tickets or whatever that it gives you. Because now these bases are actually a strategic asset. Plus, having helicopters into EC would just give helicopters in this game just something more to do than just spawn into ground RB and that heli PvE mode that nobody plays anyway. But anyway, that's been just some of the suggestions that our community has made so far on the wish list. Some a little bit more realistic than others, but hey, I mean, let the devs decide what's too much to ask and what isn't, you know? The survey that they're running right now is going to be running until Saturday, the 28th of January. If you want to go fill that out, it is linked in the video description, so go do that. I'm sure your feedback is greatly appreciated. And other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.